Welcome to the second hour of our program. Phil Ittner is on the line with us, the veteran war correspondent based in Kiev, Ukraine. You can find his video blog over on YouTube. His name is spelled Philip Ittner, Philippittner, 6 letters in each name, and easily track it down. Phil, welcome back to the program. Macron is in China right now, or maybe he's flying home today. Trying to urge President Xi to bring Russia back to reason. Well, actually, before we get to that, just, hi, how are you? How's everything going in Ukraine right now?
Yes, everything is fine, Tom. Well, by comparison.
Relatively speaking, yes.
Relatively speaking, that's absolutely right. We're still kind of waiting for a permanent change in the weather and for the counteroffensive to be launched. But aside from that, and some of the issues and topics that I suspect we'll talk about shortly here, Ukraine is still alive and well.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. First off, are you hearing anything about Xi and Putin and Macron?
Only what I'm discerning from open source intelligence and reporting that we hear from the ground. It's not just Macron. There's also the head of the European Union, von der Leyen, is out there is also communicating with China. And I can speak to the reflection that is happening here in Ukraine and the response that's happening here. And it is widespread skepticism. Mm-hmm. They do not believe that China is acting in good faith. Namely because part of China's point program for peace includes territorial sovereignty. Well, who gets to decide what that sovereignty is and what those borders are? Because Moscow genuinely does believe that the referendums they held under threat of bayonet, basically, are legitimate, and that the 4 provinces that they have that they considered to have held a free and fair referendum and now have absorbed into the Russian Federation, Ukraine sees that as territory seized. And so many Ukrainians are skeptical about China when it says that the territorial integrity and the borders must be respected. Well, that's all well and good, but who gets to decide what border and where?
Right. The counteroffensive you mentioned, I've been reading about this for a couple of months now in American newspapers. I have to believe that the Russian military has been reading about it. How do you do a counteroffensive? Isn't surprise a useful thing? I mean, how do you do a counteroffensive that everybody has been broadcasting and announcing for months how do you do that successfully?
Well, the tricky part is not letting the specifics of that counteroffensive be known. And Ukraine has been very good about that. Currently, in this build up to this counteroffensive right now, there are, miles and miles of front line that are completely shut off to any press access. That's one thing to begin with. But it's also important to reflect back on the last counteroffensive that the Ukrainians engaged upon, where everybody was convinced that the most likely target would be Kherson. And as a matter of fact, there was a information campaign that was put out by the Ukrainians saying, yes, indeed, that would be the targeting, that they would go for the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. And Russia, their defensive posture was formulated accordingly. Then Ukraine actually went for Kharkiv in the north and were able to capture that city because they'd done this feint, very much like what the Allies did with the Germans during D-Day, where they put out false information that it would be at one stretch across the channel and and then they actually went for Normandy. Ukraine's military command is very good, including the top general, and they are preparing, I am sure, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm just judging this on previous experience and also just watching how the military operates here. They've taken all of this into consideration, and they may have a feint or a trick or an ace up their sleeve But nobody, you're right, Tom, nobody doubts that a counteroffensive is coming. How that will actually look when it's launched, well, that is actually a big question.
Yeah. I'm seeing this story. Melitopol turns out to be a very bad place for Russia to park a train. Tell us about this.
I'm sorry, for Melitopol.
Apparently, a Russian train had a problem there.
Oh, the explosion of the train carrying a bunch of was it ammo, I believe?
I haven't dug into the story myself. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Melitopol is a transport hub, and Russians use railways to transport their armor. And if we're talking about the same story, apparently there was a train that was traveling to or from Melitopol and was in transit and actually was hit by what may have been HIMARS, or it could have been, the other, rocket system that we send here, the MLRS M270. But yeah, I mean, Russia has a problem in their military, well, in so much of their military doctrine. But one of the problems that they do have is this thing about transporting armor on track line, on railway lines, and they generally tend to think that because that's such a kind of hard thing to hit, especially when it's in transit, they think it's invulnerable. But the Ukrainians are really using precision artillery strikes. So if we're talking about the same story, I believe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. What is the, how is life going on you're in Kiev again, right?
Right now I'm in Kiev, yeah.
Yeah. So how is life going on there? I mean, for people who live in Kiev, restaurants open, stores open, is life more or less back to normal? And if so, how widespread is that across Ukraine?
Right now in Kiev, in the capital, it's more or less, in quotation marks, normal. Yes, shops are open, restaurants are open, things like that. We do get the occasional air raid siren. We are subjected to that, which, whether or not people are responding to it or not, because, it's kind of like, how many times can you cry wolf? But, unfortunately, sometimes it's true. And that's where you always have to measure things. But there's a psychological damage that happens as well when it comes to things like that, because you're always constantly aware somebody's trying to kill you. But right now, we haven't had an air raid siren in a couple of days. I know that around the country, there have been real palpable attacks. Odessa, about 3 days ago, I believe, came under massive drone attack. And that we hadn't seen in a while, but a swarm of Shahed Iranian drones.
The suicide drones.
Right. Well, the automated suicide drones that, just are basically a bomb with wings.
Right.
And they swarmed Odessa. If my timing is right, it was about 3 days ago that this happened. 4 days ago. So, there's constantly stuff going on. There's constantly areas that are, I mean, I know there have been, air raid sirens and potential attacks out in Kharkiv, Zaporozhye, which seems to be one of the central parts of whatever counteroffensive may or may not happen. There's a lot of talk that Zaporozhye may play a very important role in that. I'm not saying those things are connected, but, look, Ukraine is constantly under attack. It's an enormous country, and if I'm not getting it here in Kiev, Odessa will be, or if Odessa isn't getting it, Dnipropetrovsk is. It's just a constant around the country. So, this is very much still a place at war. And then, of course, there are the front lines where there's active enemy engagement. But it looks like the Russian offensive has kind of petered out. And there's this waiting for the other shoe to drop atmosphere in the country when it comes to that counteroffensive. So, we are expecting that things are going to get very active very soon. And as I say, there's kind of this anxiety of when's the other shoe going to drop.
Yeah. Finally, what are you hearing about the state of politics in Russia right now? I keep reading articles. I mean, the 40th Russian oligarch, just died in his 40s, actually. I believe he died in jail. But yes. Putin is hyper cracking down on any kind of dissent. There are reports that he's seizing passports from wealthy people. Yep. Around the country. I mean, yep. that kind of overreach has to produce a blowback, doesn't it?
But yeah, we could talk about this for a long period. So I'm going to try and get out as much as I possibly can here. You're right. There was another oligarch that died. He was in prison. He died while in prison. Yes, there are reports that the authorities are revoking passports or holding onto passports of important security individuals or oligarchs. That is not a good sign. You're absolutely 100% right. There was a death of a military blogger in St. Petersburg since we last spoke. There was a bomb in St. Petersburg that blew up and killed a military blogger who had been also a fighter for the Donetsk People's Republic. And then there are reports from a member of Putin's personal security detail who escaped who escaped and defected while Putin was in Kazakhstan, and he secreted himself and his family out to Istanbul, and he is speaking widely throughout the Western press, and his take on what is happening inside the Kremlin is really disturbing, and something some of us who follow this very closely and have contacts and who speak amongst the circle of people who really intensively follow this. Something we had heard about in rumors, but it sounds like Vladimir Putin, according to his own personal security detail, is really in a state of heightened paranoia and is not holding it together well. So lots going on inside Russia.
Phil Ittner, you can find his video blog over at YouTube. Thank you, Phil.